Hey guys, welcome back. I'm coming at you with my Kresh the Bloodbraided deck profile. So this is a deck that I made a Jund deck years ago, and it was Thantis the Warweaver, and I wanted just that everything dies strategy. And while I still want to remake Thantis, that deck just wasn't doing exactly what I wanted, so I was looking for another commander, and then I found Kresh, and I know that's probably not the most original, because he's like an older commander, but I'm really happy with him. So I just wanted to debut this deck. I actually finally put it together, I would say maybe a little over a year ago is when I finally got the pieces and put this thing together. But I am super happy with it. Not that said, I probably would wish Wizards would make a little bit more support for the strategy that I'm using, because it's one thing to do like an aristocrat strategy. This is more of a, I call it like a skyscraper strategy, where we don't just want like anything to die. We want big things to die. So yeah, let's and I'm doing the angle kind of like this, but it's just the circumstances with my table and everything, with my lighting. I think this works. I know it's a little sideways and slanted, but I think it'll work. Dutch tilt, guys. That's what the key is. All right. So yeah, Kresh. I am Mr. Basic, so I'm running 12 basics of each color. Swamps, mountains, forest, 12 of each, so the total is 36. We'll move on from there. All right, let's do. We can do the artifacts first. We'll get those out of the way. I'll put Kresh over here. Okay, so this is one, and I threw this back in my deck, and the only reason it wasn't in there before was because price, basically. But my buddy had a copy, and he owes me. So anyway, the Ozolith, obviously great card. So the Ozolith is going to let us, any creature that dies that did have counters on it, the Ozolith is going to store it, and then at the beginning of our combat, we can move the counters that were on the Ozolith onto one of our creatures. So normally with this deck, we don't really win by combat. This is more of a non-combat damage deck of, that's how we win. But if we can win in combat, that's awesome. It's just most of the time we don't even need to do that. All right, yeah, that's that. Wayfarer's Bauble. I run Bauble in every one of my decks, but unless it's monocolored, I'm going to run Bauble. Altar of Dementia. Altar of Dementia, a good sack outlet, and then we possibly could mill our opponents out if we needed to. So, just good for that. And I like free sack outlets. The sack outlets that require you to pay mana, I always find those to be extremely restrictive, because there's a lot of times where you make your plays and then you're like, oh crap, I don't have any mana. Then you can't do anything. I do play the medallions in just about every one of my decks. So I got Emerald, Jet, and Ruby. Thank you, Wizards of the Coast, for reprinting these in Commander Masters and in Modern Horizons 3. Last artifact is Phyrexian Processor. So Phyrexian Processor, let's see if I can straighten this up a little bit. Move that right there. Phyrexian Processor says that you can pay any amount of life, pay 4, tap, and then so you basically, when it enters the battlefield, you pay any amount of life. Now, normally with this deck, I pay 20 life is what I want, because that's a big enough price, but I still have some life left over if someone were to come in and attack me a little bit. So basically, just imagine this is 20, and then you pay 4 tap, and then every time you're paying 4 and tapping it, you make a 20/20. Well, obviously, we have ways of doing a lot of damage with that, but on top of that, that gives us the skyscrapers that we need for this deck to really work. And for anyone who doesn't know, I guess I should read Kresh. Kresh says, let's see if I can get that glare out. Whenever another creature dies, not just yours, but including your opponent's, you put X+1/+1 counters on Kresh, where X is that creature's power. So obviously, not only do we want our stuff to die, but we want our opponent's stuff to die. That's why I really like this commander, is because he's it doesn't matter all, like I call this deck like all lives don't matter, and I know that sounds heartless, I guess, but for me, I find it funny, because yeah, truly I want everything to die in this deck. All right, we'll move on to the creatures. So I'm doing all this stuff in low mana cost to high mana cost, so we start with the low stuff. So Demon's Disciple, from Zendikar Rising, when it enters the battlefield, each player sacks a creature or planeswalker. Obviously, this is really nice because sometimes our opponents don't have creatures. I have my buddy Jesse, who loves planeswalker decks and runs like a ton of them. So this is nice that even if he doesn't have creatures, he'll have to sack something of his. All right, Fleshbag Marauder. Let's see if I can get a better angle on this. Sorry, guys. All right, it's a little bit better. All right. Fleshback Marauder, obviously, when it enters the battlefield, each player sacks a creature. Merciless Executioner, kind of the same thing. I want to get this more straight. Sorry, I keep adjusting it. Enters the battlefield, each player sacks a creature. Like I said, there's a few of these. Plague Crafter, each player sacks a creature or planeswalker. If you can't, you discard a card. That's when it enters. All right, Ravenous Slime. Imagine this almost like a mini Kresh. That's kind of how I look at it. Granted, it doesn't work for your stuff, but if a creature an opponent controls would die, you exile it and put that many +1/+1 counters on Ravenous Slime. So that's why I like it, is that like it still fulfills our strategy, even when our commander's not on the board. It also can't be blocked by creatures power 2 or less, which is nice. Wall of Blood, this is one of my personal favorite cards that I run in a few decks, and I really like it. So it can't attack because it is a wall. It's a 0/2. But you can pay 1 life and boost it +1/+1 to 1 turn. And obviously you can do that in any amount of increments that you can pay. And yeah, the reason why I like it obviously is because if I had a kill card in my hand, I could pay 39 life, put Wall of Blood up to a 39/41, and then possibly kill somebody with it or get very close, if you know what I mean. All right, Anger and Brawn, these two are meant to just be pitched to our graveyard. I mean, if they're on the board, we can sack them or something, but Anger, if it's in our graveyard, we control a mountain. Our creatures have haste. If Brawn's in our graveyard and we control a forest, our creatures have trample. Both things we really want in this deck. Corpsejack Menace, if +1/+1 counters will be put on your creature, you double that basically. So that's awesome because obviously, let's say with Kresh, if one of our big Phyrexian processor tokens died, and instead of putting 20 counters on it, we would put 40 counters on it, which is obviously great. Disciple of Bolas, when it enters the battlefield, sack another creature, you gain X life, draw X cards, where X is that creature's power. A sack outlet, but on top of that, the gain life and draw cards, I mean, you can't really beat that. Archfiend of Depravity. I've always liked this card, but I was waiting for the right deck to, because you could throw this in a lot of black decks, but I just wanted it to be the right one where it's got really good synergy. And yeah, this one's got it. Here, I'll try to get that a little bit better. Okay, and during each player's end step, that player chooses 2 creatures they control, and they sack the rest. So that's awesome because that's getting plenty of death going. And obviously, a lot of times they'll probably keep the bigger creatures and sack the smaller stuff, but that's all good. Ghoulcaller Gisa. So you pay a black, tap her, sack another creature, and then you get X 2/2 black zombies, where the X is that creature's power. So once again, great sack outlet, and you're basically doubling the strength that you had on board in this sense, because if let's say I have a Phyrexian processor token that's 20 power, I can use Ghoulcaller Gisa, sack that thing, and then I make 40 power worth of zombies, which is awesome. Necropolis Regent. Excuse me, this is one of the only like black cards, mono black at least, that deals with a lot of +1/+1 counters that's not tribal. I mean, she is a vampire, but your creatures don't have to be vampires to get the effect. But whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. We love that. Phyto Titan, 7/2, 6 mana. When it dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control at the beginning of their next upkeep. So this is just a recurable way for us to have something 7 power that we can just keep sacrificing. Hamletback Goliath, I love this guy. I think more people should run him in just red commander decks in general. When another creature enters, not just your battlefield, but anybody else, if they play a creature, you get X +1/+1 counters on Hamletback Goliath, where X is that creature's power. This thing can get ridiculous. Once again, this is why we call it the Skyscraper deck. Omnath, Locus of Rage. Now, I've been thinking recently of running Omnath as like a Gruul commander, and if that happens, I might take it out of this deck just because I don't like having the overlap in my decks. If I run you as a commander, I don't really want you in the 99 of something else. It just takes away the specialness. But I may keep it in here because what it does is pretty amazing. The landfall triggered, if a land enters your battlefield, you make a 5/5 elemental, and if an elemental were to die or Omnath, you can deal 3 damage to something. So, I mean, that's just great. And we have a lot of ways of ramping in here, so just making it, once again, a huge army. And then the last creature is Shriekwood Devourer. This is a card that came out in Duskborn, which I really think this card is underrated and slept on. 7/5 trample for 7 mana. Whenever you attack with one or more creatures, untap up to X lands where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So if you have a creature deck that is fairly strong, I mean, almost think of this as a sort of Feast of Famine, except you technically don't have to get the damage in. You could run into, something that you can't beat, and you can still untap your lands. So that's pretty great. All right, we'll go to the enchantments. We'll get those out of the way, and then I'll do instants and sorceries. So, Dying Wish, aura, you enchant onto one of your creatures. When it dies, target player loses X life. You gain X life, where X is its power. So a lot of times, I'll end up combining this with, like I said, let's say the Wall of Blood, and I pay a ton of life. I go down to like 1 life, and then I have, Wall of Blood's 39 power. Then I sack Wall of Blood to boost up Kresh, and then Dying Wish triggers, and then I do 39, loss of life or damage to one of my opponents, and then I gain that life back. So Dying Wish is great. All right, Evolutionary Escalation. I've wanted to run this in something for a while. 2 mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, you put 3+1/+1 counters on target creature you control and 3+1/+1 counters on target creature opponent controls. So not only are we, because we want everyone to have big creatures and then we want to kill them off. So it helps that strategy because we can be like, all right, well, yeah, sure, you're getting +3/+3, but I'm getting +3/+3. It's a win-win for our deck. And then on top of that, you kind of can turn this into a political tool where if someone's got a deck that's more combat focused or they're needing a big blocker, you can definitely be like, hey, if I choose your creature and I help you with this, you're going to help me. And then you can make deals, and that's all fun. Power Balance, I said this, I think in my Dinosaur deck profile, this is a red staple for me. I know it's not the most amazing card ever on its surface, but I like the value that it can bring you over time. So whenever an opponent casts a spell, you reveal the top card of your library, and whatever that card's mana cost is, if the 2 cards share the same mana value, you get to cast the top card of your library for free without paying its mana cost. Now, once again, I know it can be rare. I know it's luck based. It's your top card could be a land. So I get all that. But for 2 mana, it gives us a shot at basically casting something for free that could be huge or just really important or just small stuff over time. The other thing is that people forget about is that there are some times where an opponent will cast something, you reveal your top card, and to show them what it is. Let's say it's a 5 mana card, but it's a difference maker card. Well, if any of your opponents, like the rest of the go-round, have a 5 mana card in their hand, or their commander, let's say, they might second guess playing it if your card that's on the top is a real difference maker. So in a way, you kind of stop their plays and slow them down while not paying any mana to do so. So that's what I like about it. All right, Branching Evolution. If counters that we put on our creatures, you put double that instead. Obviously, it works for Kresh really well. And that's the thing is some people forget, because I've seen people run Hardened Scales in this deck. Hardened Scales only takes the amount of counters that you put on a creature, and it just puts 1 more on. So if your plan is like an Aristocrat strategy where you're just sacking like 1/1 creatures, and Kresh would only be getting 1 counter on it, and then you double that basically by bumping it to 2, then I would understand the value. But this is not a go wide, let's put just 1 singular counter on a bunch of stuff. This is we're putting counters in bunches, and that's why Hardened Scales just doesn't really work for me in this deck, because how lame would it be if I sacked one of my processor tokens that normally would be a 20/20? It's like, well, because of Hardened Scales, instead of 20 counters, I put 21 on it. It's like, I'm not really getting good value on it. Fires of Yavimaya, just another way to give our creatures haste, because like I said, we don't normally kill people in combat. We want that as an option. It's just the way my games go. If I am going to win, normally it's because I have the, what do you want to call it, the gas in my hand, the smoke, that's like the fire, whatever you want to say, whatever the kids say. But I have that in my hand that I can basically just kill someone without even having to attack them. But it's nice if we have that as an option. Pain Magnification, this is a Rakdos staple for me in my Commander decks just because I like it as a political thing that I can do. So if ever an opponent is dealt 3 or more damage by a single source, that player discards a card. I like it because, I obviously can hit my opponents and make them discard, they're discarding cards out of their hand, which is always good. But on top of that, if my opponents have creatures and they're looking around the table of like, who could I attack, and there's multiple options and I'm one of them, they might look at my opponents and go, well, if I attack somebody else, I can actually make them discard cards. So it kind of helps that if one of my opponents is in the, you want to say, arch enemy position, or they're just in the pulse, the number 1 spot, basically, they're in the lead. It's nice that another one of my opponents could be like, okay, I could attack you, but instead I'm going to attack one of our opponents because, dropping them down a card is really, it's a little bit of help. Something's better than nothing. No Mercy. Whenever a creature deals damage to you, destroy it. That's great because not only does it kill our opponent's creatures, it also protects us, makes our opponents second guess if they really want to go at us, which I'm not going to lie. This deck is, as much as I want to say it's a skyscraper deck and we can make big things, there is a lot of time where it's all set up. We're playing the right enchantments to basically boost our stuff when we get to the time where we're sacking big stuff or killing big stuff. So a lot of times we are left with maybe Kresh and not a whole lot else because we're trying to build our board up. And so a card like No Mercy really helps. All Will Be One. Now I will admit that I've actually I don't even think I've ever played this card in this deck or got it to go off. I just never see it. But that said, I would never take this card out because it's amazing. 5 mana. I still want to get my camera a little bit closer. Yeah, that'll work. That'll be better. All right. 5-minute. Whenever you put one or more counters on a permanent or player, all will be one deals that much damage to any target, basically, of your choice, I believe. Yeah. Opponent, creature, or planeswalker. Yeah. So because we're doing counters in big bunches, all will be one is great in this deck. We can just kill our opponents by basically getting rid of one big token. Dictate of Erebos. My rule in these decks is I love Grave Pact and I love Dictate of Erebos. One has 3 hard black pips. Dictate only has 2. If I'm running a 3-color deck like this one, I'm going to go with Dictate because I feel like even for 1 more mana, it'll be easier to get out. Grave Pact for me is reserved for 2-color decks or a mono-color deck if I'm doing more of a death strategy. Moldervine Reclamation, I still think this card's worth running. Whenever a creature you control dies, you gain a life, draw a card. I mean, the life gain is cool, and that's a nice thing to maybe keep you afloat for a while, but drawing a card for free and it not losing you life, but instead you gain a life, that's big. I mean, like I said, I could run something like Dark Prophecy in here. Whenever a creature of mine dies, I draw a card, but I lose a life. The difference is that's 3 hard black pips. I might not always have that. Moldervine, instead of draining me, will help me because there are times where I am going to be sacking a lot of stuff. Perilous Forays. Pay 1, sack a creature, search your library for a land. It has to be a basic land. Put into play tapped. I mean, this is just a great sack outlet if you're running green in your colors. Pay 1 and then sack a creature, go grab a basic land. I mean, kind of hard to beat that. And if you have the Omnath out, it can be really devastating. Rite of the Raging Storm. Whenever creatures, so you're giving at the beginning of each player's turn, they're going to make a Rite of the Raging Storm token, basically. And the cool thing is with this enchantment, those tokens can't attack you, but they're 5/1. I don't know if they have trample. They definitely have haste. Let's see. They do have trample. Trample haste. Yeah, so it's going to have our opponents be dishing damage to each other, and that's always good because obviously the closer they are to death, the better. But on top of that, I mean, they can't attack us, and those creatures sacrifice the end turn anyway, so they will be dying. So that's awesome. Death's Presence. This is one of my favorite green cards, and I don't have too many decks where I'm having a ton of my stuff die on purpose, but this one that's great. For 6 mana, which I know that seems like a lot, but whenever a creature you control dies, whatever that creature's power was, you put X +1/+1 counters on another one of your creatures, where X is that creature's power. So that's great. Sunbird's Invocation, my favorite red card. I put it in every red deck. Whenever you cast a spell from your hand, whatever that card's mana cost was, you reveal cards off the top of your library. So if you play a 6 mana card, you reveal the top 6, and if you have anything in there that's 6 mana or less that you can cast, you cast it without paying its mana cost. You can only pick 1 card, but it's still great. And like I said, I love the card. And then the last enchantment is Grave Betrayal. This is a card that I think is going up in price that they probably should reprint if they can. But whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you get to bring that card back onto your battlefield with a +1/+1 counter. It is also a zombie. I think you get to do it right away with additional plus at the beginning. Sorry, at the end step you get to do it. So I guess you got to wait a little bit, but it's still good with all the value that you can get. And like I said, I mean, it doesn't work with tokens, but it works with everything else. And we are going to be trying to wreck our opponent's boards as much as possible. Okay, I'll do the only instant in the deck is Fling. Sack a creature. Whatever the creature's power was, you deal that damage to any target. All right, and then we're going to do the sorceries, and then that'll be it. Okay, so Thud, which is like Fling, except it's sorcery speed. It just costs 1 mana as opposed to 2. All right. Farseek, let's just go grab any basic type of land that's not a forest, which people still run that in mono green for some reason because they don't know how to read. Life's Legacy, you sack a creature, whatever that creature's power was, you draw that many cards. Great sack outlet, but also, I mean, like I said, we could sack a Phyrexian Processor and draw 20 cards. I'm not necessarily trying to draw 20. There's a lot of cards I could be running in here where I could draw even more. But the bottom line is, like, our goal is not to just have 20-something cards in our hand. That's no good to us if we don't have the mana to play all those cards. So, and these aren't a bunch of just cheap drops. I don't run a bunch of, like, 1 or 2 drop cards. I mean, I have a few, but the ideal number is maybe, like, if I could draw, like, 7, 8, refresh my hand, that would be nice. But, all right. Rampant Growth, you guys know what that does. Go grab any basic land, put it on the battlefield tap. Rite of Consumption, you sack a creature, and then, once again, it's basically like a Thud or a Fling, except it's in black. The only difference is you do get to gain the life equal to the amount of damage you dealt, which is amazing. Buried Alive. This is what we use to pitch our Anger and our Brawn. And then the third creature can basically just be something you want to bring back from the graveyard. I do think, we got at least one card in here that can bring something back from the graveyard. So yeah, Buried Alive, I always love the card. Cultivate, you guys know what that does. Grab 2 basic lands, 1 goes on the battlefield tap, 1 goes into your hand. Eldritch Evolution, I love this card in green. I'd run it in more decks, except it's like, I have some decks where it doesn't line up very well, or my mana costs are all weird and skewed, or there's other decks where I just don't have like powerhouse creatures that I really want to get out. But in this deck, yeah, you sack a creature, and then you can go, like if I sack a 3-mana creature, I can go grab anything that's 5 mana or less as far as creatures and put it on the battlefield, which is great. It does exile itself when you get done playing it. Essence Harvest, this is a card that I ran in a deck way back in the day, just as, I think it was in a Sultai deck, and I just was trying to cheat out big stuff, and I ran Essence Harvest, and then once I made this deck, I was like, dude, this is perfect, this is what Essence Harvest was made for. So target player loses X life, you gain X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. That's great because, as you guys have seen, or what I've shown you or talked about, we can get pretty strong creatures. Obviously Kresh being one of the biggest. Miming Slime, 3 mana, put an XX green ooze onto the battlefield, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So basically, why don't we just make a copy of whatever our biggest thing is? Now, I hate making copies, but in this case, it doesn't have the abilities of the creature, but it does have the stat line, which is cool. Toxic Deluge, I don't normally run Toxic Deluge in a lot of my decks, not because it's not a great card, but because most of the time I'm wanting to keep my board presence. I play a ton of creatures, and this card kind of, stops that. But in this regard, I can have a bunch of big, as I said, skyscrapers, and then I can pay, let's say everything of mine is like 6 power or greater. I can just pay 5 life and wipe the board of everyone else's smaller stuff, which is nice, and then my stuff's perfectly fine. And then, Kresh would get bigger. Victimize, this is the way we grab stuff back from our graveyard. We pick 2 creatures out of our graveyard, we bring them back. Only thing is we got to sack one of our creatures. The creatures do come in tap, but normally we don't really care about that. Boiling Seas, I do blow up lands. I like land destruction. Sorry, get over it. Destroy all islands. I don't feel sorry for that. I don't feel sorry for blue players. Decimate, this is a Gruul staple for me. I still run this. I think it's good. You blow up an artifact, a land, an enchantment, and a creature. I know everyone's like, well, yeah, but what if you can't play it all the time? That very rarely happens where there's not a valid target for each one on the board. I mean, I'm not one of those people that's going to blow up my own stuff unless I absolutely had to. Normally there's a creature of your opponent's out there. There's a land, obviously there's an artifact. Normally the enchantment's the only thing that you're like, well, maybe that might not happen. But I mean, I would blow up my own enchantment if it meant that I was like saving myself from impending death. But aside from that, like I said this, I think in a previous video, the dinosaur profile, about 80% of the time, if I have Decimate in my hand and I can play it, normally I will play it because it's valid. Like I'm just saying, like 80% of the time it makes sense to play it, I could play it. Very rarely, 1/5 of the time, maybe there's not an enchantment out there. But, I normally can wait and just play something else. It's all good. But getting rid of 4 things for 4 mana, that I can't really beat. And the fact of the variety of things you can beat. All right, more land destruction. Flash fires, destroy all planes. Once again, I don't really feel bad. White's normally going to try to preserve themselves, do life gain, do a lot of removal. So, the quicker we can get rid of their lands, the better we are. Fungal sprouting, strongest creature, you make that many 1/1 green sapperlings, whatever that creature's power is, so that's good. Ruination, destroy all non-basic lands. I don't feel bad about this. I run basics. The same people that make fun of me for only running basics and be like, wow, man, like I don't even know how you play the game, and then I play Ruination, I blow up their non-basics, and then they're pissed at me. I'm like, so is it better to run basics or non-basics? I'm like, because you just were making fun of me for non-basics, and then I use that to my advantage, and now you're upset at me. I was like, so get over it. Chandra's Ignition. This is one of our kill cards. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent. This wrecks the board, basically. And if by some chance this doesn't kill everybody, if we have Kresh out there and he's already big, this is just going to make sure that he's, Godzilla, basically. Traverse the Outlands. Whatever our strongest creature is, we go grab that many basic lands and put them on a battlefield tapped. We run 36 basics. Obviously, we'll have some already on the battlefield, but I mean, there has been times where I was able to just get all the basic lands out of my deck pretty quickly, like I said, on like turn 5 or turn 6. Descent of the Dragons. This is one that I like. Pay 6 mana, destroy any number of target creatures. That's what I like. I can pick any number amount. I don't have to blow up everything. For each creature destroyed this way, its controller puts a 4/4 red dragon with flying onto the battlefield. Now, if I have another, let's say, board wipe or something like that in my hand, sure, I'll be like, everyone gets a dragon. I'm killing everything, and then I toxic deluge or whatever else I got. But, in this regard, I like the fact of if my opponents have creatures that I'm like, ooh, that's tricky, I gotta, get rid of that. This is a removal. But on top of that, if I have a bunch of smaller creatures, let's say the fungal sprouting, I have a bunch of 1/1s or something, I can upgrade those into 4/4 dragons. So it's pretty cool. Rishkar's Expertise, one of the best draw cards in the game. You draw cards equal to the strongest creature's power that you control, and then you get to cast something 5 or less for free without paying its mana cost. It's a great card. It doesn't work in every deck because a lot of times your strongest creature might only be a 3-power creature and you feel like you're not getting your money's worth. Boundless Realms, I run this in every green deck. Whatever your basic land count is, you go grab that. Whatever your number of lands are, you go grab that many basics and put them on the battlefield tap. The worst thing you're doing, I mean, I guess you could reduce the costless card, but the worst case scenario is you're paying 7 to grab 7 lands. I still think that's a good ratio, obviously, because normally we pay 2 to get 1. But I know people, they don't like this card because oh, I got to wait that long to play this. I'm like, bro, this is normally you play this card, and then on your following turn, you win the game. So I know people be like, oh, well, I can't believe your games will last that long. Yeah, in a 4-player game, games aren't just, sometimes they're over quickly, but a lot of times they are going to keep going. And then the last card is Preposterous Proportions from Foundations. 7 mana, creatures you control get +10/+10, gain vigilance till end turn. This is great to just pump our creatures. We could possibly win in combat with this, or we could just, like I said, sack a lot of that stuff up and Kresh gets all the glory. So yeah, this is a very fun deck. I really like this. Like I said, I call it my No Lives Matter deck, so I love it. And I will see you on the next deck profile. I believe the next one I'm going to do is Earl the Miststalker, which is another big, strong creature. I guess it's not skyscrapers, but yeah, anyway, you guys know what I mean. That's it for now. Have a good one, guys.